Hey everybody, and welcome to my N5 series on the SP404 Mark II, where I cover a topic in about 5 minutes. This is session 10.2, and today I just want to kind of go over the Midi settings in the system settings, kind of how they work. So to get into them, you want to hold Shift down and push Pad 13 to get into Utility. You're then going to push in on the value knob to go into your system settings, and you'll use the Control 3 knob to scroll through to get to Midi, and then you can use your value knob to kind of scroll up and down. So the first one that you have here is Midi Sync, and it is able to be set to auto, internal, Midi, or USB. Personally, I would suggest most of the time you're going to want it either set to auto so that it will default to internal or switch over to an external source depending on what you have, if it's sending a clock or not. But if you know specifically you have some external gear that might be sending in a Midi sync and you don't want that, definitely set it to internal. Or if you have two devices that are sending Midi sync over both Midi and USB, you might want to choose Midi or USB so you can make sure you're synced to the correct one. But I think in most cases you're going to want auto followed by internal, but it's good to just kind of know those are there. Next one, the Midi Sync Out, is basically just saying whether or not your Mark II is going to be sending Midi sync information out. So this is going to be stuff like BPM and some of your controls, whether it's starting or stopping playing patterns and things. So usually I have it set to on, but you might not want it on depending on how you're controlling an external device. Next one, the sequence note out, is basically going to be telling the Mark II whether or not it's going to take your patterns that you've created, and is it sending those notes that you're building up patterns, is it sending the information out or not? The reason why you might not want it doing that is you might be wanting to have pad banks, A through J, having samples on them and playing external gear at the same time. Depending, as I was showing you before, like here for Gadget, I've set up Dublin as channel 1 all the way through Taipei as channel 5 for Midi, but that effectively means I cannot use banks A, B, C, D, or E if I want to use that to play external gear. I would then have to use banks F through J for my samples for my internal patterns. Now, what you set for your Midi output from the banks to external devices, you can, if your device allows you to configure that and set things up differently, you'll have a lot of control over how you can set things up. But it's just a thing to know. If you don't want any of your sequence information going out to an external device, just turn it to off. And if you want to be able to control external devices, you'll need to turn this to on. Again, this is really just for sequence. It will still send that Midi information as you hit pads out. But as I said, I just want to make sure you understand. The next one, for soft through, this might be a little bit more confusing for people that haven't worked with or used Midi much or at all. But effectively what this means is if a Midi note comes into the Mark II, is it going to just take it and process it internally, or is it then going to also send it to the out, over the out? So the reasons why you might want to have this turned on is you sometimes end up, depending on how you configure Midi, is you'll end up with a chain of devices, and you might want one piece of gear to be controlling the Mark II or sending sequence data, and then you want the Mark II to pass it on to the next device in the chain, and then from there you want that to have a soft through to pass it to the next device in the chain. Older gear used to have a input and output and a through, and you'd use the through jack to pass the information to the next gear in the chain that you wanted to. Since that's not the case for a lot of gear anymore, you really just have the input output, and you'll have this soft through option. So again, turn this on if you want the incoming Midi data coming into the Mark II to be passed on to the next device in the chain. And if you don't, then it's better to probably just leave this as off so you don't get spurious or other unknown behavior for these things happening. And last but not least, the USB MIDI through is basically the same idea is, do you want the MIDI information coming out or coming into the Mark II? Do you want that to be passed through to the MIDI, the USB MIDI? Turning this on, you can kind of turn computers or your iPad or whatever you have hooked up over USB-C into just another device in the chain, and it'll function in a similar manner. And this is just all kind of based on how you want your Mark II to be set up and how you want it to work. So hopefully that gives you guys a good overview and understanding of these MIDI settings. But I just figured it was worth going over for people that might be kind of confused about why you might or might not want some of these things set. So hopefully that helps you out, guys, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.